to the Game Dev London podcast. I'm your host, Ahmed El-Badawi, and you can refer to me as he or him. And today we're going to be talking with,
Edd Coats. Hi, hello.
and so we're going to be talking with him about like his profession, UI, and like who he is, and all sorts. So, I guess let's get the show on the road. Like, Ed, do you want to like tell me about yourself?
Hello, I'm Edd Coats. I'm a senior UI artist at Double 11.
Cool. So, how did you get to that point in life? Like, what is the path you took?
So I started off, but I basically graduated in computer science at the University of East Anglia, and I thought I wanted to be a programmer at first, but
Yeah.
then I soon learned that that would be a terrible idea because programming is really awful and you lose your soul. And so yeah, I mean, I was kind of like I sort of didn't know what I wanted to do basically, and I had
Yeah.
a friend of mine passed away. I had a breakdown in my early 20s.
Mm.
Got diagnosed with OCD, depression, anxiety.
Yeah.
So I was out of work
I'm
for a
sorry
good
to
few
hear.
years. And then in that time, I did some like web development stuff as a freelancer. Not a huge amount.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, and like I've always wanted to get into the games industry. It was always like a massive dream for me, as a sure it was for like lots of other people as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and a friend of mine was working at this small pixel-based pixel art MMO thing that I was a member of for like years and years and years,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Do you want to come join us and just do some voluntary stuff?" So I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, sure." So I joined them as a volunteer, and I created some stuff for them. I like redid their website, um, built some games and things for them. In
Mm.
the end, they asked me to become a community manager,
Oh, nice.
so I joined there. I joined in that position, and yeah, so like that was like my first taste of the games industry, really. Well, I mean, it's weird thinking of that as the games industry now because
Yeah.
it was such a like a niche thing at the time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like years later, I would sort of learn that a lot of the stuff I learned in that job was very valuable.
Yeah.
Um,
That's good.
so yeah, so after that, I started doing some like freelance work. I like my first freelance job was like 80 quid doing like some music for a game, like a mobile game.
Oh, wow.
Um,
So you can code, you can draw, you can play music, you can play music like that,
yeah, I
dude.
can do a lot of things.
That's good. That's good.
But yeah, so I did this sort of like £80 track thing as like a jump in, and then I wanted to become a composer.
Yeah.
And then I learned that it's really difficult becoming a composer in games. There's way too much competition. And then
Mm.
someone was like, "Oh yeah," and then I applied for like one of these freelance gigs, and they were like, "We don't have any composer slots, but we are looking for a web designer. Would you like to do some web?" And I was like, "Oh, not again." um,
You thought you'd run
but
away.
yeah, yeah. But because it was like a web job in games, I just went
Yeah.
for it, and that
Mm.
soon led to more freelance gigs with the same people. And we ended up getting a job with John Park, who made the Articulate board game.
Nice.
So they wanted us to make like a new IP for mobile, so we worked on that for a little bit. Lots of lessons were learned in that. It was a very up and down kind of process. We're all
Yeah.
learning, yeah. And then I got a job in this other thing called Arcade for a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and then they lost their funding, and I was sort of like left, sort of like without any kind of like security. No, and I hadn't looked for my own work before.
Yeah.
So at that point, it was almost like a reset for my career.
Hmm.
So I decided to like start my own like business as a freelancer, um,
Cool.
doing
Yeah.
web stuff, and yeah, so I basically created like some branding. I made like a portfolio, put some stuff on there,
Mm.
and yeah, I gradually got into UI that way.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so a few freelance gigs hired me as a UI artist. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it's been growing ever since. Really, it's been going from like very small indie projects, and then
Mm.
this year it just blew up. Like I ended
Mm.
up working on this thing called Dark Table, which got kickstarted.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
we had
Congratulations.
we had the voice of Bulbasaur randomly,
It's a claim to fame. Like, I'm not gonna knock it.
which is really cool.
Yeah.
Um, And then I worked on this thing called Before We Leave, which was an Epic Store
Mm.
exclusive game. That was on the front page of the Epic Store for like 3 months. Like when they gave away like GTA 5, like everyone saw this massive banner for this game that I worked on,
Oh,
which was
nice.
insane. It was like the first big thing I'd worked on, and
Yeah.
like my friends were sending me like screenshots of my name in the credits and all that kind of thing. Yeah, and oh yeah, and like watching it being played on Twitch, that was really cool.
Oh, wow. Damn,
I've got a
dude.
funny story about that later, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And what else did I work on this year? I was working for like a small Chinese company for some mobile games. Uh,
Okay.
their last game had like millions of downloads, so like that was a pretty big deal. Um, oh yeah, I worked with a director at Marvel and Lucasfilm on a pixel art kind of game where we had like the
Oh.
pixel artist from Octopath Traveler on there.
Oh,
Um,
wow. That's really like I mean like that game's like the pixel art in that game is amazing. So that's pretty fantastic
It's
of an
funny 'cause I didn't
opportunity.
actually know who was doing the pixel art until like 2 months into the project. I was like, you could have told me that. So yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I've just finished working on a Switch game, which I can't really talk
That's
about
fine.
though. There's a lot of NDA stuff, like so I'm just sort of like going around.
Yeah, like I like one of the things like when I came into the industry as well was realizing how much you just can't speak about what you're doing. Like you just can't like it's
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
like everything is on the NDA unless it's like already out. But like
yeah,
because
yeah,
with the industry like you're working on five stuff and like one thing will only ever really come out but like make it through to the end of the pipeline sort of thing. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, it's UI, I feel like it's not really something that you see taught. Like,
Mm.
like for example, I didn't know anything about UI until after I graduated from like uni, and like like a few years after that. It wasn't until I met a friend who was making games, and they were like, "Yeah, UI is a thing. Like, UI is actually like a full-on subject in of itself," and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
blew my mind because at that point I was just like I didn't know it existed. Like there wasn't even like oh, I think like people make. I just didn't know it was a thing. And so like,
yeah.
do you feel like I don't know like how difficult it is? Do you see it being or like for people to kind of get in go down the route of UI and UX or is that
Um,
something that's getting easier?
it's something that before now was sort of seen as like something that artists were forced to do.
Yeah.
Gunpoint, no, gun. But it's funny though because I know so many indie studios who can't afford a UI artist, and they do get
Yeah.
the artists to do it, and then the artists are like saying to me like, "Why? Why would you do this as a job?" And I can totally understand that from like going on Facebook and being like,
Yeah.
why would you guys do this, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like it used to be something that was like an afterthought almost in games, and I
Mm.
guess in recent years it's become more appreciated, like the power that a good UI can have.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I'll say like my usual example. Like I usually use Sunset Overdrive as an example.
Okay.
um
Yeah.
so it's one of these games where like you take away the UI and the game looks fairly generic.
Mm.
It's like it's quite cartoony, it's quite sort of um you know it's not going for realism essentially, but it's not
Yeah.
stylized enough where it's like iconic.
Yeah.
It's very just it's very generic. It could be anything.
Yeah.
But when you think of Sunset Overdrive, if you close your eyes and think about Sunset Overdrive, you think of those orange splashes of paint and
Mm.
the grunginess and all that kind of stuff, and the sort of splats and
Yeah.
that's all UI. So the UI has entirely like driven the style of that game.
Yeah.
And you talk to people and you'd be like, oh yeah, that game has a lot of style, but it's not the game itself. The game has no style. It's that's don't say that.
I mean,
Oh, God, they're going to be ninjas after me.
oh man, I feel sorry.
Insomniac's going to send ninjas after me. The game has a very generic style compared
Yeah.
to a lot of other games that are going for that cartoon look. It's the UI that has that iconic kind of that fresh kind of style, with the
Yeah.
yeah. So and I find that really fascinating because that's something that um that, I mean, like you can reverse engineer that, right? So you can take a game that doesn't look great. You could even take like an asset flip on off Unity or whatever,
Yeah.
and you could literally make that into something that looks really beautiful just by adding a great UI.
Yeah.
It's
No.
something that, so if you invest in a really good UI artist, you can really transform your game. And
Yeah.
that's something that a lot of people are now just starting to realize, I think, which is really cool because there's a lot of work out there, and not many good UI artists, I'll say.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, like, I guess as well, like like another kind of game that comes into mind where with like outstanding UI is like Persona 5, where just the UI makes the game like just really just
Mm,
it. I wouldn't say like it makes the game, but it very much like if it wasn't there, it wouldn't never have had the impact it has. Like if you
yeah,
put like say the Final Fantasy like 3 like what's it called, like generic
menus.
turn-based menus and
Yeah,
everything, like
yeah,
it's just not the same. And there's like a lot of like older Japanese games, like I remember like growing up, they didn't have like um really accessible UI, and it really didn't
mm,
stick with you. It was just a menu for menu's sake. um but like Persona, people literally like cosplay it as like the attack UI
mm,
in the fights and everything. So it goes to
yeah.
show how impactful it is.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
nothing like the game itself. I mean, I think you probably could recognize the game just from the gameplay.
mm,
But I mean,
mm,
it's still like a generic kind of anime
like
cartoonish.
RPG, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it could be a lot of JRPGs,
yeah,
Um, but again, you close your eyes and you think of the UI. The UI is the most prominent feature of that game.
mm, mm,
That's what gives it its style. So yeah, like it's an extremely powerful tool that a lot of people are now only just starting to use properly.
yeah,
um, so yeah, that's really exciting because I love really pretty UI. I love to, yeah, it's just, I just think it makes a game, a lot of games nowadays have this sort of, they just go with the flat, flat rectangular kind of style,
yeah,
where it could almost be an app, it could just be like a plain app.
mm,
And I think it works for some games like Breath of the Wild. They were going for minimalist, so
yeah,
for that it makes sense.
mm, mm.
I wouldn't have wanted them to go all like ornate and whatever with Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, it would have been kind of like like it doesn't match considering that they're going for like a survival minute, like acid, like bare minimum kind of aesthetic. To have a UI that's really ornate and fancy, yeah, just wouldn't work.
Exactly, yeah, and then you have something like Star Wars Battlefront, and
Yeah,
again, like they go over the same style, but I think it works because I think Star Wars is its own style. I
yeah,
think everyone knows what Star Wars is,
yeah,
and I think if you were to like go with this sort of like over the top sci-fi thing for the UI, I think it might come across as a little bit cheesy
yeah,
or trying a bit too hard. So with Star Wars, like definitely it's one of those examples again where like flat is, it's okay to do that.
mhm,
But
mhm,
then you have something like Division Two.
yeah,
I think the UI looks very nice, but it does sort of look slightly generic. So yeah, I'm going to get a lot of developers after me from saying.
Thank you to everyone who tuned in for today's episode of like the GDL podcast. Please check out gamedev.london for any latest updates, and otherwise we'll see you here same time, same place next week. Bye.